I'm not going to lie, for a long time I felt all alone in this space. Now, I don't mean this room, this house. I mean being a right of center film critic. There just aren't that many of us. For a long time it was me, it was John Nolte at Breitbart News, Kyle Smith now at the Wall Street Journal, but he was at National Review for a while. And there are a few other voices in this arena too, but it was a pretty small gathering of people. I used to joke that we could fit all of us in a clown car and have plenty of leg room left over. It's not even a joke. I think you really could have done that if we had our clown noses on and fit quite well, because there just weren't that many people covering Hollywood from a right of center or even just non-leftist point of view. And that is changing. And it's fascinating, some of the changes that are going on within this space, because a lot of it isn't technically political. I've met some people over the years, including the team from Film Threat, also The Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, PopCulture Crisis, and I would listen to their shows and think, wow, they must be political like me. They're right of center. They're conservative, but oh no, they're just aghast at what's going on in Hollywood. They're against censorship. They're for free speech. They want to break away from the bounds that have been put on artists at this point in our culture. But there's a newer voice on the scene. Her name is Smythe, and she's with the Daily Caller. And I think she is more openly right of center. And she is someone I think you want to get to know. I've enjoyed reading her columns. I enjoyed talking to her even more, which you'll find out in a minute. She is a unique voice in the space. And one of the things I liked about our conversation is that it wasn't just about pop culture or entertainment or the culture at large. It really ran the gamut. We're talking about growing your own food at one point. That's the kind of conversation we had. And that's why I was so intrigued by what she had to say. So yes, you can find her at the Daily Caller. You could also follow her on X. She's at Smythe. That's Kaysmythe. But just get to know her a little bit. Start here if you haven't read her work before. I think you'll be intrigued by what she has to say. And I know for me, just having more voices like hers in this arena, in this environment, is all for the better. So hope you enjoyed this bonus episode with Smythe, and we'll be back at a regular time on Wednesday. Well, Kay, thanks for joining the show. I think the work that you and I do is fairly rare, because when I first got into this business, 20 plus years ago, everyone covering Hollywood, entertainment, celebrity culture, it was either left-leaning or pretty aggressively left-leaning. And it's actually gotten more extreme from there. So to approach it from a different perspective is fairly novel. How did you get into this line of work specifically? Love of pop culture? Were you worried about the fact that you were swimming against the tide? Just kind of bring us into that part of your career.
This is, okay, so I'm going to try and be succinct, which means that I'm probably going to go on for like 5 minutes now, so I apologize in advance, because it's not a short story. For me it starts probably about 12, 14 years ago. I was writing with the Huffington Post, and a handful of other outlets. And when I was at university, I started noticing this sort of trend, like, okay, Hollywood seems to come up with a consistent class of bad guy. And it kind of tracks over about a decade span. You can go back and see this since the dawn of cinema, really. And I was looking at it more from the perspective of, my degree at the time was a geography degree, but I really put my emphasis on sociology and that more sort of like macro social science. What are these things that actually influence us day to day, that is across the board, that unites us in many ways? But what are the sort of nuances that go into this that influence our way of thinking? And so looking at the bad guy and how that sort of like defines stereotypes, I ended up getting introduced to a guy called Richard Cabral, who is an actor. He's Emmy nominated. I don't think he was at the time. And his sort of crew of guys that he worked with, all of them were associated with Homeboy Industries, which is a big charity out in Los Angeles. And they were all reformed criminals, essentially, like former gang members, like guys who'd done like serious time for serious crimes, who had found that pathway out of that lifestyle and were being cast in these huge productions. But most of the time they were being cast as the bad guy. So sort of like reinforcing and normalizing those stereotypes. And like, I think a prime example of that is actually somewhat ironically, the show Sons of Anarchy. Like when Sons of Anarchy came out, we saw a huge spike in young men joining motorcycle gangs. Not good. So, you know, great show, not good in terms of like the actual sociological impact. And actually Richard and all those guys ended up being in the spin-off of Sons of Anarchy. So that's a whole other story. So I moved out to Los Angeles because I got my visa to write about this stuff, that sort of confluence of entertainment meets that macro sociology, and those sort of sociological, I guess, analytical tools that we use to sort of track what can really prompt behavior rather than what has caused previous behavior. So sort of like looking forward, like how will this thing affect us if it keeps going? And so I got to Los Angeles. I don't know why I'm laughing. I think it's because it's just so dark. But I got to Los Angeles sort of right as like all these really terrible policies were kicking off in regards to prison reform, the treatment of homelessness, not just in California, but across the country. And so I had these few great years where I was living in the industry. I was just doing the whole scene, as it were, you know, living out my version of the hills or whatever. And got to see a lot of it firsthand, met a lot of very famous people, was like, okay, I don't want to write about this because I'm in it and I hate it. So I was doing academic consulting at the time. And then once the homeless crisis really kicked off and I started to notice that these people who had huge influence were just like, oh, sad. We gotta let these people just die on the sidewalk because it's the right thing to do. Otherwise we're being judgy. And I'm there like, what? What? And so I was like, no, this is rubbish. So I wrote this article on my like personal website or something random like that. And I always tell people like, I'm one of the laziest people in this industry, but I love what I do and I get it done quickly. So it just looks like I'm lazy. I just work fast. But, I always tell people like, if those words are there, you have to get them out. And even if one person reads it, that matters. And so I was very much taking my own advice at that point. And I wrote this piece that was completely satirical about like what it would be like to visit Los Angeles for Christmas time and how awful the city had become because these liberal politicians, these Democrats were just enacting these short-sighted, completely lack of common sense policies that were killing people and leading to, you know, real issues with like, you know, crime, drug addiction, the fentanyl, like poisonings and overdoses were just like insane. We've got human trafficking and it was satirical, but like it was still quite dark. And Dr. Drew, of all people, read it because he was a friend of a friend. And he got me on his show. And at that point, and it's still to this day, I'm a registered Liberal Democrat in the UK. Like the Lib Dems were always great. They were a great party for me. And I had been a staunch Liberal when I first arrived in California. And I think it took me 6 months. And that was also like the first year, like that was during the 2016 election, like the run up to that. But I really got to see what happens on the ground when these policies are enacted and when celebrities and famous people really back them and support them. And it leads to death. And so I just kind of was like, no, I'm not okay with this. And then from being on Dr. Drew and talking about it, I met a lot of people in the sort of conservative space. And I would say, like, you might hate a lot of people on TV, like a lot of people who watch, you know, like news anchors and stuff. But I'm like, but there's a reason that certain people stick around. And it's because they're really nice people. And so I was really lucky that I got to be introduced to a lot of really nice people. And they've all sort of like supported my career up until then. And I would say like, they're going to have to fire me at the Daily Caller for me to leave because I'm not going to go work anywhere else. It is like the most fun place to work in the industry. But making that switch for me, it was a long journey, but I didn't really have a choice because like the data was just there. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And a couple of thoughts. One is when you write something that hits the bullseye, it doesn't matter the platform, whether you didn't have fame at the moment, it registers. And I think that's what Dr. Drew recognized. That's why he wanted to share what you had to say. So that matters too. I followed Dr. Drew's career for the last, 25, 30 years. And it's funny, he sounds like a conservative now, but he's not. He's just aghast at what's going on specifically in LA because he's been there forever. So it's fascinating, to kind of have him connect with your story. Good for him. And by the way, I've met a bunch of celebrities over the years. I've only taken my photograph with one celebrity, and it was Dr. Drew, and it happened twice. So
no way.
I really do admire the work he does.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised that he recognized the voice you had, the fact you had something to say. And by the way, satire matters. That's why a lot of the late night shows have become propagandists, because they understand the power that they wield. And the fact that you were able to kind of use satire to make a significant point, I think it says everything.
Oh, well, firstly, thank you. And secondly, okay, this is refreshing as heck, because that was one of my biggest things in Los Angeles. Like, my parents and my family, maybe not my parents, but like family, friends and stuff back in the UK would always be like, wait, so-and-so told me you were hanging out with X, Y, and Z famous person. Why aren't there pictures of that? And I'm like, because it's my like quiet recreational time. Like, I'm not on my phone when I'm not working. Like, this is a work device, even though ironically right now I do not feel like I'm at work. So thank you. And yeah, Drew is one of those people who, and his whole family are just like fantastic human beings as well, which I think really helps. And I've always respected him. Like, he's got an opinion that can't be bought. Mm-hmm. And that was an extremely validating experience for me, getting to work with him. So that was right when the pandemic hit as well. Yeah. So it was just sort of like these historical moments that I was a teeny little part of. Mm-hmm. That's really just like allowed me to manifest my dream, which is writing about this stuff. Like you and I were talking just before we went live about how, we're in an election year. Everyone's going to be focused on the politics of everything. But the day after the election, there's going to be more people probably interested in the stuff that you're talking about, what's going on with entertainment. Mm-hmm. And it will last so much longer and have so much more of an effect on real people's lives than I think even a lot of like federal level politics will. And so I think like having people like that in the industry, even if it's just Drew and you and a couple of others, is like, gives me hope.
I always use two references when I say that pop culture matters. One is the Rachel haircut from Friends. It was a sensation. Everyone wanted the Rachel haircut. They thought that Jennifer Aniston looked amazing, and she did. But that influenced the culture, just that hairstyle, not even anyone drawing attention to it, just the fact it was on a popular show. And even President Biden a few years ago talked about how the shows like Modern Family and Will and Grace really impacted how we collectively thought about gay marriage. And whether you disagree or agree, I think he's right. I think, so I think that pop culture does matter, which is why all these different people try to use it to their advantage, which leads to my next question. Every 4 years, Hollywood puts their firepower behind the Democratic candidate. How do you think it's going to play out this year? It's so unique. Kamala Harris is brand new in a sense as the candidate. Do you think they're going to have sway over the population, or do you think that we've tuned them out completely?
I think a large portion, that is such a good question. I think a large portion of the population has tuned a lot of it out. Unfortunately, that population is pretty much just here in the United States. Like after living in California, I moved to the middle of nowhere. And I much prefer it to living in, like the west side of LA. But people around here, they're just not as, like, that stuff just doesn't influence them. What influences them and their decision making is real practical day-to-day stuff. Like, how much does stuff cost? How much is gas? Are there vagrants living under, is it safe for my kids to walk to school? Like, et cetera, things like that. So yeah, I think to a degree, there's a lot of the coastal people, the city people, young people will be influenced, I think, a lot. I also kind of like the fact that living out in rural America, I get to see the impact of Christian entertainment. And I think with shows like The Chosen, even though there's there's no politics in it whatsoever. I mean, like, it's just, I think it's one of the greatest pieces of entertainment ever created, actually. I think that sort of resurgence, that awakening we're seeing in that mainstreaming of Christian shows, Christian movies, I think that is actually going to have a huge influence over more Americans than maybe even Hollywood at this point. But at the end of the day, politics, it all comes down to money. And Kamala Harris has a lot of money. So yay for Christian entertainment and the influence that it's having on the central portion of the United States. And I think, at the same time, there's a lot of influence as well from Donald Trump, and we're seeing a lot more sort of normalization and mainstreaming of pop culture icons like, Tucker Carlson. I think Hulk Joe Hogan. Rogan. Yeah, like Hulk Hogan, like what? Kid Rock? Brother. Like, come on, like even John Daly. I'm like, I don't even like golf, but like I appreciate any athlete who will stand there and smoke a cigarette right before, doing athletics. I'm like, okay, that's so European to me. Which is probably the last thing that he would want to hear. But but I think that the weight that's been thrown behind Kamala Harris is all coming from the really wealthy players, the ones who actually own these industries. And that's where my sort of concern comes in, seeing what happened in California. Like if that comes to the rest of America, like that relegates this continent, I think, on a global level. Yeah. And that freaks me out.
You wrote recently about the Green Day, Billie Joe Armstrong holding that Trump head aloft. It was a mask, obviously, but the intentions are there. I want to get your thoughts on that more specific, because we just saw Jack Black and Tenacious D have to scramble, apologize, cancel their tour, all self-inflicted, by the way. And yet I don't think Green Day will suffer any consequence. I think their fame could be even bigger as a result of that. Again, it is political protest, but coming on the heels of the assassination attempt, it couldn't be any more cruel. What's your take on how we process Green Day? People on the right will be upset. I get that, but I don't think anything happens to them. I don't know if I want it to happen to them, but I want to get your thoughts. What's the fallout?
Yeah, I kind of like that. Like I'm the same way. It's like I don't want anything to happen to anyone. Like I think we just leave that up to God, and I know that karma will come back around in whatever way and shape form that is. But yeah. I massively tend to agree with you. I think that the only difference that this is going to make is, like, honestly, maybe this is biased, but like people like me, I would have paid to go and see Green Day before I, saw this and had to write about, like, the timing was just... It was just not cool. And I agree, like I'm all for the art of the protest, and it was, physically harmless. But I think that post-assassination attempt in a very extremist world, dude, make better choices. Make better choices with your influence. Like American Idiot was so good. Like it came at the perfect time. It was the perfect protest album. And like, why aren't Green Day furious that after... more years of Democrats being in control, we're in a worse off state. Like, that's what they should be looking at is like, okay, well, we wrote this album. The Republicans got kicked out after Bush. We had 8 years of Obama. We had 4 years of Trump. And now we've had 4 years of Biden. And guess what? We're still on the boulevard of broken dreams, bro. Like, come on. Like, what? So I feel like there's a lot of that kind of aspect of it that's being ignored. And I put in my piece, like I didn't realize until I got to Hollywood how that sort of like wealth privilege and being a celebrity actually shields you from the real world. Like you do not get to have a normal, average human experience when you reach any kind of success or fame or notoriety. Like those freedoms get completely taken away from you. And so I think with that comes a lot of ignorance. So I think all the Green Day fans are still going to go buy the tickets. People like me, people like my friends, people out again in real America. No, we're not going to go buy tickets for that band now, but we're still going to listen to all their music because up until whatever happened after American Idiot, I think there was like one more album and then like, who cares, personally. Like that was enough for us. But I think that's going to be it. And yeah, like the Jack Black thing, he completely did that to himself. I'm going to cancel my tour. I hate fun and I hate all you guys. He's just getting his knickers in a twist, as we say in the UK. It's just awful. But no, I don't know. I think that do you think people will buy tickets after that, like to go see Green Day? Or
I think he may have. I think the band may have sort of separated their fan base already to this point. So people like you may be the exception, who were sort of on the fence and might be willing to buy the tickets. We have short attention spans too, and honestly, what I've seen from people who are right of center is that we rage against Disney, but when the new Disney movie Deadpool versus and Wolverine comes out, we all rush to the theaters. So I don't think there's a lot of uniformity of thought or even boycotts or boycotts. So it kind of goes that way. I want to ask you, you and I see this landscape, we see things bubbling up, we have certain takes. Are there stories or themes or narratives that maybe are bubbling up that you're seeing that maybe people aren't talking about right now, that maybe in 6 months will be all over topic X or subject Y? Anything come to mind in that regard?
I think in entertainment, I think we're too far out. I am sort of excited that we're seeing this like resurgence in cinema after the strikes, and like actual escapism. I think that's something that I'm looking forward to in the future. I think, the fact that Tim Dillon's coming back to Netflix, I think that, I think there's a few things like that, but I hate to say this, but I think the next big thing that no one's really talking about is not actually, I don't think entertainment related at all. I think we're probably heading for a pretty big financial crash, or at least a more extreme version of financial upheaval. But it's funny. I think by the time this goes live, I will have written the piece, but I saw that Roadhouse, the director, was saying that he and Jake Gyllenhaal had like 50 million streams or like 50 million viewers on streaming, and they saw none of the money from that. And I hate to say this, but like tough. Like industries evolve, okay? Like I've written for the last like 2 years about the fact that like AI one day is going to be able to scan all of my work and be able to churn out articles way better and faster than I can. I will be made redundant. The only thing that I might be able to do, if there's a market for it, is possibly write fiction. Again, I don't know. The world might be a dystopian nightmare by then. We hope not. Let's hope that the solar storms don't hit or the volcanoes don't erupt. But I think that the real shift that we're going to see, and it's come up before, I think, that was obviously one of the biggest things within the strikes, was really, it was just all about money. It was about the fact that you're not getting paid residuals anymore. It's about the fact that, AI can do an actor's job, except for stage actors, who I have a huge amount of respect for. I think those themes, they're going to come up again. I think they're going to get really pushed in the run up to the Oscars, probably. They need something to anchor to, especially if Kamala wins somehow. Like, I think the biggest thing that Hollywood's going to be talking about is, in the midst of a financial crisis, we're not getting residual checks anymore. And like the rest of America is going to be sat there like, where is the food?
Yeah. The Oscar for most tone deaf comment goes to.
Yes. But that's kind of where I'm at.
You mentioned the director and the actor saying they weren't paid. I know Jake didn't say that directly, but there are so many people struggling in Hollywood. And you've known that. You've seen that probably firsthand. To come up with that comment where that Jake Gyllenhaal is well compensated and Doug Liman is very comfortable at this point in his career, and to be bitching and moaning about that, and he may have a point, but boy, look, read the room, dude. I mean, you're in an industry that's really changing and evolving and shrinking, and to kind of kvetch about that is unbelievable. Before I let you go, you're working with the Daily Caller, you're hitting these topics. Are there projects or themes or subjects or just things you'd like to tackle down the short road that you're not doing right now? I mean, you seem like someone who has a lot of innovation in mind and someone with ambition. And I didn't mean that in a positive way. What would you like to be doing in a year or two that you're not doing right now?
You know what? I go back and forth. That is, wow, this is crazy. This is like, surely this is the kind of question that my family should be asking me, or I should be asking myself. No, I kid. I'm a very long-term thinker. I think it's easier to make long-term plans. You can take smaller steps to get there. But I think the thing, if I had to like leave one thing behind within my writing career, I would really love it if like anyone who read my work would figure out how to grow like vegetables and like keep animals at home. Because it does, like, I'm all across the board when it comes to my writing. I prefer writing about the entertainment stuff. I prefer writing about actually a lot of ancient archaeology and things like that. I think that's fascinating. I think that's going to become really mainstream. I think we're going to move away from your ancient aliens, and we're going to go more into your Graham Hancocks and your Jimmy Corsettis and your Y-Files and things like that. I think that's going to be a big thing. Mm-hmm. But all of it sort of adds up to this idea that what happens in entertainment, the shows that you watch, what happens in politics, as soon as a crisis really hits, those things fall to the absolute bottom when it comes to, like, you're not going to care about who Taylor Swift is dating when, you know, I hate to say this, but when something really serious, like when catastrophe strikes, and we live in an incredibly unstable system. I hate to get all doom and gloom about this, and I promise there is an upside to it. But I think that one thing that people can take away from Hollywood, when it comes to applying practical things to the real world, like practical skills, things like that, I think everyone should go out and watch your Captain Fantastics. I think everyone should go out and watch your Hunt for the Wilder Peoples. I think everyone should go out and watch this great BBC show years ago. I think it was the BBC anyway, about the Yellowstone volcanic eruption. I think everyone should watch National Geographic. I used to love them. They do a lot of like data manipulation. Like there's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, like that study wasn't really worth you saying all that, but okay. But I think that using those outlets and those avenues, whether it is, you know, fictional and hyperbolic, or it is like your sort of documentaries, go out and learn that stuff, digest it, understand it, learn new skills, learn how to go out and forage and find like your fascination. And like, particularly for kids, like anyone with young children, I'm just like, put them in front of a documentary. Put them in front of David Attenborough. Don't watch those cartoons. Don't watch all that stuff. There is so much good out there that you can learn from that will inspire a better symbiosis with the natural world. And that is what's going to be most important and what you will take away if and when the worst happens. Yeah. And I hate to say it, but I write a lot about how the worst might happen. So, you know, sorry, that was a long...
Get your hands dirty on multiple levels and expose yourself to things that have some grit to them. But okay, thank you so much for joining the show. Of course, you can find Kay's work at the Daily Caller. She is prolific. I noticed that as someone who has to write and write and write, I can send someone else who has the speed and the gravitas. They're going to put some good content out there. If you want to follow her on X, it's at K Smythe. Its last name is Smythe. And thanks for joining the show. I share some of your doom and gloom. There's still a flicker of optimism in me.
Of course.
As well. But I appreciate your sober outlook, and hopefully we can talk again.
Absolutely. This was so much fun, Christian. I really can't thank you enough. And thank you for everything that you do. You make my job so much easier, and you give me so much hope. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's bonus episode. I hope you're checking out my shorts on this YouTube channel, also on Instagram and Facebook. I have to say, I've recruited my young son to do some of the heavy lifting there. He is much more technologically savvy than I am, so I think you may enjoy them if you're interested in the kind of content we're sharing here. Again, like and subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you next time. And again, before we go, if you have any concerns about the show, any questions you'd like to ask me, any suggestions on the kinds of topics we'll be tackling in the future, have at it. You can reach me, Christian@HollywoodinToto.com. That's my email address. Feel free to share your thoughts there. And, you know, this has been an odd journey for me, just going on YouTube, being a person in my 50s, in my dotage, and joining this revolution, which is really for the young. It's been scary. It's been weird. It's been exciting. It's been challenging, to say the very least, but I hope this is the start of something big. I want to grow. I want to change. I want to mature into this arena and share some thoughts with you. So again, thanks for sharing. Thanks for checking this out. And I will see you next time.